Boom shakalaka. All right, finally, we're going to get up to the place where we can talk about my music. It's like James used to say, fellas,
I'm ready to get up and do my thing. I want to get into it, man, you know.
Before, after. Before, after. Frightening. Ferris Bueller was right. Life goes by fast.
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. I recall Central Park in fall.
All right. This album, I worked so hard to get the opportunity to make it, and I worked really hard making it. We put everything we had. When I say we, I mean I didn't do it all alone. I had musicians that helped me. I played most of the instruments myself, but there were singers, there were guest artists from my famous friends Stevie and Michael Jackson. The record company, Solar Records, my attorney who got the deal, Johanna Vagoda. So I didn't do it alone. So this is not the imperial we. We all worked our butts off, and then it came out. It was a big disappointment. The number I heard was 8,000 units is what it sold, which is not great. Since then, who knows? Maybe it's sold 9,000. I don't know. But in the years since then, and it's been 42 years, I think that I've heard from all 8,000 of the people who bought that album, and they all say good things about it, and people still listen to it to this day. Set the Wayback Machine to 1982. That was the year that I willed this into existence. My first solo album. This was, I say I willed it into existence because I did. I had a little bit of help. I had a lot of help. I had there were coincidences, serendipity, random chances that you would never expect, help from friends in high places, but none of it would have happened if I hadn't been obsessed with the idea of making my own record. And it had been an obsession of mine for 10 years by this time. I mean, as a musician, I had played in bands in high school, and we played for the school dances, and then later I'm playing in clubs, in bar bands, and doing the Holiday Inn circuit, you know, playing in cover bands. And I wind up in LA because I wanted to get into the record business. And at first I thought I wanted to be a session musician, which I did. This came about a little bit easier. And anyway, I was a session musician for a while. I also was a touring musician. I went on the road with Michael Jackson and his brothers, and those were all great experiences. But I came to realize that what I really wanted to do, what I really loved, was the recording studio. And I wanted to use it as an instrument. And that's the way records were being made more and more in those days, is they were being built track by track. And it's like a sculpture. Where the term, you talk about a record, it came it meant like a little original meaning of it was literally a record of the time to capture something in place. So you have a radio recording of Count Basie in 1938. That's an actual record, time travel thing that captures what that band was like in 1938, and they were awesome and mighty. But rather than just capturing a moment by putting up microphones in front of something that happened, in time, the recording studio became a place where, through experimentation and building things up one track at a time, and just having fun with all the things that are available, you could do highly experimental stuff, and you could come up with things that no one had heard before. And this, this has a long history. It goes back to Les Paul and his multi-track recordings that he made with Mary Ford. But it for me, in my generation, it really came about with the Beatles when they decided to stop touring. And that gave them the freedom to do things in the studio that they couldn't possibly pull off live. So, starting with Rubber Soul and Revolver, they started making really cool sounds, and the instrument was the studio, beyond the guitars and pianos and all that sort of thing. The occasional string quartet would be an octet, and then a Rigby. And then working with Stevie, it was fascinating to watch how he made his records. And I endlessly peppered his engineers, Bob and Gary, with questions, and they were quite patient with me. And most engineers that I've said before, they're happy to explain to you what they're doing. And then when we did Thriller, same thing, watching Bruce Swedien and Quincy and Michael and the whole process. I just loved being in the studio. And I'd always had a fascination with the recording. In fifth grade, I had a little reel-to-reel tape recorder. It was like a toy. You couldn't record music with it because it didn't play back at a constant speed. It would warble, and it had those little reels that are about like that. But I used to have fun with that thing, just recording different stuff. So I've always been interested in that. And then you start hanging out in professional studios, and it's just so cool. Unbelievable. The things that you can do. That became my obsession. This overwhelming desire to make my own album.
If he didn't want me to praise him with music, why implant the desire? Like a lust in my body. And then deny me the talent.
I'd been making demos of songs I'd written for about 10 years at this point. Started out with I had a Sony reel-to-reel machine that could do what they called sound on sound, and it was, you kind of bounce one track to the other while you're adding something, and each time you did that, it went down a generation, and it wound up sounding worse and worse. But you could build up tracks that way. But it was klutzy. It was hard to use. Then I graduated up to the 4-track cassette machine. When I was working with Stevie, he had a Otari 8-track recorder that was just sitting in the studio, and he would let anybody in the band, and myself, I wasn't in the band, but we were welcome to use it as long as we bought our own tape. 1-inch tape, 8 tracks. So I did some demos on that thing. So it's a combination of chance and making demos until finally I had a demo that became the record. Because I got an opportunity to make a demo in one of the top studios in LA. Yeah, talking about demos and Stevie, Stevie used to listen to my demos, and that shows you what a cool guy he is. I mean, he didn't have to do that, but I would ask him, Steve, can I play you a demo? And he'd say sure, and he'd listen to it and he'd give me notes and or just say that's cool or whatever. I had one tune. He said that'd be a good tune for George Benson, and oh my God, I was like, wow. He said, give me a cassette of that. I'll give it to George the next time I see him. And I was just so flattered that he thought that my song was good enough for George Benson. Nothing came of it because I don't know if he, I didn't pester him about it. And I think that song wound up being on this album. I think it's the track Nobody Knows, which has a guitar melody. It's an instrumental. Either that or I lost another one. I've lost so many songs that I've written just because I've lost the demos and nobody was interested in the demos. I played Steve a demo once that I was kind of excited about. And he listened to it and he said, that's my song. And as soon as he said that, I realized that I had subconsciously stolen the melody to a song that we were working on at the time in the studio. It was the song "Do Like You" from Hotter Than July, and I had subconsciously in my mind transposed that melody to this really nice lead Mini Moog sound. That was embarrassing. He just laughed about it. He said, don't be stealing my songs now. So obviously that demo went nowhere. But I got an opportunity to make the ultimate demo in one of the top studios in LA. And how that came about falls into the chance encounter and serendipity department. And also, for some reason, when I'm looking back on all these certain things keep cropping up. It's like it was meant to be. And it's a certain music store and a certain synthesizer. They always, all my stories tend to revolve around them. But one day, this is probably early 82 or late 81, I don't know what. But I popped into Guitar Center just to see what was new. I wasn't working there at the time, but I still had friends there. And I walk into the keyboard department, and the salesman goes, oh, here's the guy you want to talk to. And I'm going, wait, what? I just came to look. And he was talking to these two guys, and he was showing them a Yamaha CS80. That's the synthesizer that keeps cropping up over and over again, because what a magnificent beast it was. Well, anyway, the salesman said, this guy knows all about this machine. And one of the guys, who turned out to be Allan Zentz, who was a legendary recording figure in his day back in Hollywood, said, so you think this is a really good one? I said, I know it's a really good one. This is fantastic. I said, and I just started babbling about this and that and the other. He introduced himself. I recognized his name, and I think by that time I may have actually done a session or two at his studio. Allan started out as a mastering engineer. I don't know if that's how he started out, but I mean, he started out with his own business as mastering records, and he was known as one of the best in town. In fact, if you go on Steve Hoffman's vinyl forums, where the vinyl nerds get out the magnifying glass and find the mastering engineer, they talk about Allan Zentz's masters. And Allan was highly skilled at mastering, which is it's an arcane art to transfer a master tape onto vinyl without losing everything. Allan was really good at that. He was one of the best. And he started out, he had a mastering studio, but then he expanded and built a recording studio. What he was doing that day in Guitar Center, he was getting ready. He decided that he wanted to produce a record, although he'd never produced a record before. He knew engineering in and out. He knew the whole recording process. He wasn't a musician, but you don't really have to be a musician to produce a record. You're just the guy who makes decisions. Say, yeah, I like that, or no, try something else, that kind of thing. So he was going to produce this young guy whose name was Eric Robinson, and he was a gospel singer, and they were doing a disco gospel album. So what we wound up doing is Allan bought the CS80 to use on this project. He was doing completely on spec for Eric, and he had a studio, so it's easy for him to do something like that. And I made him a deal. I said, I'll come play keyboards on your album that you're producing and program the synthesizers and do it in exchange for studio time. And he said, you bet. All I had to do was pay for my own tape and pay the engineer. So, boom, I'm in. And working on Eric Robinson's album was it took a while, took quite a while. The music was not always my cup of tea or whatever, but we made it work. It was not a great record, but Allan, to his credit, got Eric a deal. And nothing really came of that record, but you can find it on YouTube, different songs. But that gave me a great chance to get to know that studio. At the time, I didn't realize that I knew a lot of hit records had been made there. I didn't realize that Quincy and Michael did Off the Wall at Allan Zent's recording. I worked there all that time, and I didn't realize that. And I had, I'm working with them that same year. Small world. I mean, back then, the music business in LA felt like a small town. Everybody knew each other. It's not like that anymore. These kind of things would not happen these days. They just wouldn't. It's a different world. So I wound up recording 5 songs at Allan Zent's just as a demo. And I recorded Call Me, Papa Was a Rolling Stone, So Shy, Nobody Knows, and Wake Up. It was those 5 songs. But Wake Up and So Shy didn't have those titles because they didn't have any lyrics. I recorded instrumental versions of those. I had some instrument covering the melody that didn't wind up on the final track because I always intended them to be to have lyrics and be vocal tunes. I knew Finus Henderson from that band I was in briefly with Al McKay. Finus is Al McKay's cousin. And Finus and I got to be friends, and I asked Finus if he wanted to write lyrics for the song Call Me, and he said, yeah, sure. So he wrote them, and he sang on the demo, sang his ass off. And later we re-recorded it because I decided to change the tempo slightly. And we wound up having to fly in some of his vocals from the first version because he just couldn't match that insane Philip Bailey thing he improvised at the end. I mean, because that was just like one of those things that just, it was just magic that we were lucky just to capture that as it happened, because he improvised that and it was brilliant. So anyway, we had Finest singing that, and then I'd done Papa Was a Rolling Stone with the vocoder. Didn't have any background vocals on it yet. And then 3 instrumentals, 2 of which were intended to have vocals. And I wound up playing Call Me for Stevie one night. And he listened to it and he said, I like this. And I'll never forget that at the end, you know, when the chorus keeps repeating, and I had that rising thing to build up to the point where it'll get back to repeat on the chorus. And then as it does that, it ends on a very unexpected chord. And Stevie said, why'd you end on that chord? And I said, so you'd ask that question. Because I knew that I didn't want it to fade, because it's like a cliche. It's like, you know, I mean, I'm not against fading out a song, but that's the easy way out, you know. What's cooler is to come up with an ending. And I wanted to have a definite ending, and then just while I was just fooling with it, I just landed on that chord, and I thought, that's out of the blue, and I liked it for that. And so I explained that to Stevie, and he understood, because he does that same kind of thing sometimes. But then he said something I was not expecting, and all the time that I had played him demos, and he's a good friend and patient, that he listened to some of my dreadful stuff. But finally, one time he heard that, and he said, you should play this for Vagoda. Now, he meant Johannan Vagoda, who is the brilliant music business attorney who got him his groundbreaking deal that emancipated him, gave him creative control, and set him up for life when he came of age, when he was 21. And that deal made history. And I hadn't met Vagoda, although I'd been working with Stevie off and on for 3 years or so. I'd seen Vagoda a million times, but I'd never spoken to him, because he'd come down to the studio, and he and Steve would go off into Steve's office, and they'd be, you know, talking business and whatnot. And I never really had occasion to talk to him. But Steve said, go call him up. He's living at the Hyatt on Sunset. So I did. Vagoda was a little intimidating, you know, because he was from the Bronx, and he was very direct. But I called him up, and he said, yeah, okay, yeah, come on, I'll listen to it, bring it over. And I go and knock on his door. And he opens it up, and he says, he takes the cassette. He said, I'll listen to it, but I can't guarantee anything. I don't work on anything that I don't love. Okay, I'll let you know. Your phone number on here? Okay, all right. Boom, closes the door. Then it doesn't invite me in, you know, it's all right, it's good, it's fine. I understood immediately. He doesn't work on something if he doesn't love it. Now that's actually kind of cool. Well, only a few days went by. He calls me up and he said, I got you a deal. I got you a deal with Solar Records. Come on over, I'll tell you this story. I think that's enough for this one. We have covered why, how, the coincidences, the sheer willpower. I willed this into existence.